Perfect. Alright, we are live on the YouTube feed. Make it full screen. I'm getting the Anchor app up and running, and we will get going. Hello everybody, welcome to Coffee Time with Byron and Dave. I'm your host Byron. This is, I believe, episode 25. I lost count somewhere because I've done so many. But I am gracious to have my first UFC fighter. Are you former? I couldn't tell from Wikipedia. Are you former or current?
Yeah, former.
Okay, former. Sorry. Sorry. I should have done my research. My fault. But I'm glad to have on my first MMA fighter, Mike Pierce. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, man. I can't complain.
I hope you and your family are staying safe, and God knows this pandemic-driven weirdness going on.
Yeah, no, we're all good. Although my dad did get the virus, and he's 60 years old, but I mean, it kind of kicked his butt a little bit for probably a week and a half, 2 weeks. But he came through, and he's all good now.
Did you get it at one point in time?
If I did, I have no idea. If I did, there'd be no symptoms because never had any fevers, no loss of taste or any of the other telltale signs. So
there you go. That's a blessing. Same here. I wouldn't have known either. So yeah, that's what they say
it's
about
funny. I mean,
disease.
it has a very broad spectrum of how it seems to affect different people. I mean, you could be on your deathbed to not feeling any symptoms at all and just not feeling any effects.
Yeah. So now that we're into that, I gotta ask you, are you happy with now UFC finally getting fans back in the stands? The first one was last pay-per-view, I believe, in Jacksonville. They sold out. Are you glad to see fans finally back in mixed martial arts?
It's really cool. I mean, so I've been working with Ed Herman, who's been a long-time UFC fighter, and we've done a couple fights at the Apex Center, which if anyone's been paying attention, they don't have anybody outside of the essential crew there, like Dana, the commentators, referees, the Nevada State Athletic Commission, cornermen, obviously the fighters. So I mean, just basic necessities, and it is a completely different energy inside that facility than it is inside of a packed arena with fans screaming, and it's a completely different feel.
Yeah, that's it. Now you said that, that's gotta be a weird feeling because you as a fighter never went through that, and for these fighters to literally fight, I know they're used to it because of sparring, but it had to be different. It just couldn't feel the same, right?
Yeah, I kind of thought about that too, went back and forth on it, because I was thinking, most of our time is spent outside of the octagon in training, and there's not usually a packed crowd inside the gym. So you're dealing with, your coaches and some other guys in the gym that are cheering you on or helping coach, and, you feel that it would have a similar feel come fight time, but it's just not. It's a completely different thing.
Now, you were obviously in the time of when the UFC got big, which I would say in the era of, I want to say 2000s to 2010s. Let's just go with that.
Sure.
What do you think made the sport more popular than what it was when it was coming into its own back in the 90s?
Well, I think everybody can kind of point to the first season of The Ultimate Fighter when it was being aired on Spike TV, which is a mainstream network on cable TV. The Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonnar fight just drew an insane amount of people and turned a lot of heads and got people tuning in. So I think that was a really big turning point in the UFC and kind of for the sport to go in a more mainstream direction. But the sport, it has changed a lot since the early days of UFC 1 and so on, But it's really kind of come into its own and become a legitimate sport for the most part.
Now, I watched the Ultimate Fighter Championship 1 finale, like most everybody else. And I even saw it, and I had the 100 Best Fights DVD back in the day. Would you consider that fight, like me and most other MMA fans, that Stephan Bonnar Forrest Griffin fight, the best fight ever, and nothing can live up to that?
Man, I don't know. I mean, you can take a lot of different fights and kind of put them into that category of, what's the best ever. I mean, thinking back to the early days, I mean, people were really intrigued to see what the best fighting style was, and everyone kind of early on, because of Royce Gracie, thought Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was the creme de la creme of fighting arts, but come to find out everybody was completely wrong. Mm-hmm. So you needed to be a well-rounded MMA fighter, a complete fighter, and if you had holes in your game, then they would be exploited, and you would find out very quickly that you can't be a one-dimensional fighter. So, I mean, whether it's that, the early day stuff, or something like the Stephan Bonnar Forrest Griffin fight that kind of turned the corner and brought MMA into a more mainstream light, or even some of the newer stuff today where these are big draw fights. It's hard to say. I mean, I really love the old school stuff that kind of cultivated MMA into what it is today, but that's just me because I love nostalgia and sentimental stuff. That kind of got me into the sport.
So, in the early days when it was going on, that's what got you into it. What would you say, what style did you want to be, or did you want to grow into your own fighter?
Well, I mean, real honestly, I just wanted to build on my wrestling background and the skill set that I developed since I was freaking 12 years old. I always kind of thought that us wrestlers would do well. And of course, when I was a young kid, maybe it was just a thing of destiny, but I was a big WWF fan. I was a big fan of the Karate Kid series. And so things to do with fighting and like proving yourself, against another human being always intrigued me. I'm just not sure.
Now, I'm glad you mentioned the WWF era, because I watched it myself. And to me, that was the best era. Even though it was fake, it was still the best time. But in that time, you had Shamrock and Severn taking turns, coming back and forth throughout. What did you think of that? Did you think that was cool, or do you think they should have just stuck with maybe doing Ultimate Fighting, which was what they ultimately wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I understand what they were doing, because in those early, I mean, it's not like those guys were making millions of dollars, right? I mean, there's still a lot of guys that are making millions of dollars. And so they were trying to make the best of their careers. There's only so much damage and competitive longevity you have inside the octagon, and so they're just testing the waters and looking for other avenues to kind of continue and build off their career. So I just like Brock Lesnar. I mean, Brock Lesnar was, I actually watched him win his national title, and then I always thought, even back then, I was like, man, if that guy ever got into MMA, he could probably be, a pretty scary guy to deal with. And, he jumped in immediately to WWE, did that for a while, and then kind of got the itch to, test his skills a different way, and did that for a while. And he did a little bit of the back and forth, but it seems like he settled on a WWE, and he doesn't have to worry about taking unscripted damage. Right. I guess this is a little more choreographed what he's doing, and he's getting paid well. So and that's something that he can do for considerably a lot longer than he can in MMA.
Now, this is what I've always been curious of. You can help me out with this since you were a UFC fighter. How did Dana White and them and the higher-ups do your guys' contracts? Was it fight-by-fight basis? Was it like the video games where if you lost 3 straight fights, you're out? How they manage that?
The way they do, so I don't do much. So I can only speak to how my contracts have worked. But generally speaking, the contracts have always been in 4-fight increments. And so my first contract I had was a 4-fight deal, and it was, at the time, it was actually pretty decent, I guess, as far as the standards were back then. But I got my first fight was $8,000 to show up and fight, and then another $8,000 if I won. Of course, I didn't include sponsors or whatnot, but when I first started, I thought that was a big deal, right? And so the way that the contract worked, though, is there was a caveat to that. You would only bump up to, so it would kind of go by increments of $2,000. It would be 8 and 8, 10 and 10, 12 and 12, so on and so forth, right? But it would only bump up to that next tier if you won. If you didn't win, you would be, my next fight would be another 8,000 to show up and fight, another 8,000 if I won. So that's kind of how it worked. And then by the time that I left the UFC or got released from my contract, my final contract was $34,000 to show up and fight, another $34,000 if I had won. And the sponsorship, I'm sure we can get into the Reebok deal at some point later. But
we will.
I mean, that's generally how the contracts have worked, to the best of my knowledge, and from other guys that I've talked to. The 4-fight increments seem to be pretty standard.
Now, how much more would it have been if you fought for the title?
That's hard to say. I mean, so there's some guys that I know that did fight for a title. Like Nate Corey, for example. He's a guy that, another early guy too on the Ultimate Fighter show as well, where he signed a particular contract at a certain point and then happened to fall into a title fight against Rich Franklin. As you guys know, if you watched the early days there, he had one of the highlights, right? Getting knocked stiff in the promo, right?
Yeah.
Good PR. Anyway, I love giving Nate crap about that. Anyway, he didn't get any kind of increase in pay or any kind of championship incentive in any kind of pay. It was just, okay, you signed a contract. This is your, say, third fight on your contract, so this is what you get. You get X. Doesn't matter if it's a championship fight or not. So that's kind of crappy in my opinion because, most of these fights, the standard fights, and this was the way for a long time, that it was 3 rounds, each one of them is 5 minutes, championships are 5-minute rounds, and, that eventually migrated to whatever the main event is, 5 fights, it didn't matter if it's championship or not, but you would expect if you're doing more work, that you would get paid more, but that's not how the UFC operates.
Yeah, I can agree with that, and that's kind of why we can get into it now, like we talked about before in text. That's why I kind of like, not only is it because I don't know hardly any fighters anymore, because they all retired, but the politics in UFC now is just, in the way they babied the sport. I know they want to protect the fighters and all that, but it to me is in the politics of you guys and the contracts and all that. It seems like you guys are getting screwed in the background, for, say, if it's an up-and-coming fight or whatever, new free agent or whatever, they get the fight first before the guy who worked into it. You get what I'm saying? And that's what I kind of, drew away from UFC. But I still watched it every now and then to this day. But, like we were talking about before, I don't get what's involved, but do you feel like I do, and why there's some kind of aspect back behind the scenes that doesn't treat the fighters right?
Yeah, so you're kind of touching on a few things that have kind of irritated me over the years. Like when I first became interested in the sport, it was because I wanted to figure out what the best fighting style was, right? And anymore nowadays, fighting talent is actually secondary to personality.
Right.
If you have some sort of marketability based on appearance or a personality or whatever it may be, where the UFC thinks that they can make some money on you, that almost trumps your fighting talent to a degree. And to another point on that is, foreign fighters have kind of always gotten a little bit extra cushion on being able to lose more. Like you mentioned the video game earlier about, if you lose 3 fights, you get released.
Yep.
The standard issue practice that I have always been understanding is that if you lose twice, you're gone. That's generally speaking for domestic fighters, unless, you're a champion or contender or someone that they find highly marketable. there was George Soteropoulos, who was an Australian guy. I think he had 4 losses in a row or something like that before they finally released him. But they hold on to these guys because they hold some sort of incentive for when they do shows abroad for a draw. They can advertise that locally and bring people in or get them to tune in, whatever. I mean, I understand that it's a marketing ploy and that part of the business is to make money. I get that, but it's kind of transformed into something that I barely recognize and something that I don't appreciate. I wish it was more about the sport and who the better fighter was, but it almost seems like that's become secondary.
I can name a fighter right now, and I think you know where I'm going with this one. He's been a mockery. No, don't get me wrong. He's a talented fighter. Don't get me wrong, but his tactics is ridiculous. You know who I'm talking about?
McGregor?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Well, here's the thing. So I don't fault the fighters for playing the game, because just like the rest of us, we have a short window of time to make a certain amount of money in the sport and be competitive and do well, right? And so if that's the game that they have to play to be successful, that's not their fault, in my opinion. I think it's the people behind the scenes that created the environment for that to be the case, because it doesn't seem like the emphasis is much more on the fighting talent. Again, they've engineered it to be more of a spectacle and an entertainment thing than an actual sport to that degree.
Like the whole publicity thing with Khabib, when he was in that rivalry with Khabib, with the destroying of
sure. That was asinine. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, come on. That was so staged, and everybody was saying off camera, oh, he meant to do that. Oh, he should be arrested. Okay, yeah, he should, but that was all staged, just like WWE is staged. I mean, come on. I mean, I felt bad for the fighters because they took, with that stupid stunt they had him pull, those fighters weren't able to fight that night, the majority of them.
Yeah, I think it was Michael Chiesa that got some sort of a cut or something with glass hit. I don't remember what the details were, but he ended up not being able to compete that night,
Yeah, it's just stupid crap like that. I mean, I get, like you said, taking a fight with Mayweather. I get that, but that one was staged as well, I think. I think that was staged as well.
There was no way Mayweather was losing that fight.
Right,
no one, not even Conor knew that was going to be any...
I do get your point, though.
It was a money grab.
Right, I get your point. You gotta do what you gotta do as a fighter and make that money. I get that. So I'm not upset with him on that. It's just the fact that that fight shouldn't have happened, because that was a stage, and everybody, at least I knew it, you knew it. If you think that fight was real, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah, it was a great entertainment display, I guess. But I think Mayweather probably could have beat him at any point.
Oh yeah.
He just he let him kind of hang in there a while. Not that Conor's terrible on his feet or that he's not a good athlete or any of that stuff. It's just, Mayweather has done boxing his entire life since he was a kid.
Right.
It would be the equivalent of Mayweather coming in and stepping into the octagon. It's night and day. They're two different things.
So now also I want to get into, we talked a little about it. You kind of briefly brought it up. What's this act? I'm kind of curious now. You were talking about it in text. What is this about?
So we can kind of piggyback off of Conor McGregor, because, as we all know, he said very clearly that he quadrupled his net worth in a single fight. And so that's because boxing has the Muhammad Ali Act. That's a federal law. And that it was basically created because of Don King. Guys like him that created coercive contracts, a bunch of shady business practices. It basically allowed boxers to have more negotiating power and actually be able to see the figures and, increase their earning potential. That's something that was by design left out when they stole the blueprint from boxing, when the Fertitta brothers and Dana bought the UFC and laid the groundwork. They knew what the Muhammad Ali Act was. Lorenzo was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission. He knew very well what that would mean.
Right.
And so they omitted that, not by accident. And so they created basically a Don King era style of MMA. And they've been exploiting that to the fullest since its inception. And so it's funny, like, I didn't realize it until I started watching it happen in real time. Like, once I got into the UFC, my second fight was against John Fitch. He was the number one ranked guy in the world under GSP. Very well known.
Yep.
I was getting $10,000 to show up and fight, and then another $10,000 if I had won, right? But I got $20,000 in sponsorship money at that point. And it was funny to watch, like, very slowly. Each fight that I had after that, sponsorship dollars consistently went down. I never earned more than that my entire career, because the UFC at first it was, you know, you can't have any competing sponsors, like nothing against Bud Light, Harley Davidson, Zions, whatever their sponsors are, they can have whatever they want, just no, which I understand. Okay, no competing. It's their platform.
Right.
And then it turned into we have to approve everything, and then it was we're going to tax certain clothing companies $100,000, and then so if you think about that, if you have a certain budget and you have to pay this $100,000 tax, it doesn't leave a lot left in the budget to dish out to fighters. And then it just became, okay, we're going to unilaterally decide that we're going to have a singular sponsor to be a more professional looking sport, and we're going to decide what you guys are making. So they systematically drove down earning potential by, again, not letting us have any kind of say at the bargaining table, and just said, okay, well, we're just going to say based on how many fights you have, you get X amount of dollars. And, you know, one group in particular that hurt a lot was the females, because that's a new group of people that was ushered into the UFC, and so they didn't have a lot of fights under their belt. And so they were making bottom tier money, which I think is $2,500 in sponsorship money. I mean, it's embarrassing. I mean, what other sport that is competing at the highest level is getting that little in sponsorship money? Even the champions get $40,000, and I think now that we have the new sponsor, Reebok's out, Venom is the new sponsor. I saw the latest breakdown of what that comes out to. The champions, they get, I think, $42,000. So in that 5-year whatever contract span it was, they got a $2,000 pay increase. How freaking amazing is that? That's absurd.
It is.
But these are the things, like the Ali Act prevents these coercive contracts, prevents so many things that these guys behind the scenes have been taking advantage of against these fighters. And so, I mean,
what a shame.
In boxing, it's not uncommon to have a 50-50 split or even a 60-40 split where the talent gets 60%. And if you look at any of the other professional sports, I mean, they've all kind of gone through these growing pains where they had to have players associations and sue people to finally understand, like, hey, this is a partnership. Like, we're nothing without your promotion, your platform, and you're nothing without the good top quality talent.
Exactly.
There should be a more even split of the revenue. And you can, like, part of this lawsuit that the UFC is in, it's a class action certified lawsuit, they've consistently paid 20% or a little less than for years. So 80% is going to you guys. Generally speaking, I mean, that's a lot of money. And they set a franchise record by selling it for $4 billion. I mean, it's not that the money's not there. There's just an insane amount of greed, and it's insane. So that's why I'm looking forward to things like the Ali Act getting picked up, and including all combat sports, particularly MMA, and looking to leave the sport a better place, you know.
So who started all this lawsuit against was it a numerous amount of fighters? Was it one, or? So,
and I don't know all the details because I wasn't there in the very beginning of it. I kind of heard the rumblings of it from some of the guys, but I know Nate Corey was a named plaintiff, Kung Lee, John Fitch, Kyle Kingsbury, and there's a couple others, but With the exception of Kung Lee, I'm buddies with all of them. I mean, I talk to John Fitch every now and then. Kyle Kingsbury was at my wedding. I talk to Nate all the time. But these were the original guys that have kind of brought the case, and it's gotten federally class action certified now. So that's not a good look for the UFC.
Do you think it's ultimately they're going to win? Do you think they're going to win?
I think what's going to happen is that the UFC is going to eventually settle, because if they go all the way with it, since it's a class action lawsuit, the damages will triple. And I'm not sure what the dollar amount is currently sitting at. I just know that it's going to be a probably multi-billion-dollar lawsuit if they take it all the way. So I think if they're smart, which clearly they're smart business people, I think they're probably going to settle at some point. And however that money's divvied, I don't know. What the settlement will be, I don't know. But really more important than that, I just want the kinds of business practices that have been used up until this point to go away and actually make it fair.
I hope so, and I agree with you on that. So I want to get into it with your career. You made your debut at UFC Fight Night 19 against Brock Larson. What do you remember most about that night? Did you have goosebumps?
I remember I was supposed to get my ass kicked. Like, no one thought I was going to win. He was this, top contender in the WEC. The UFC bought out the WEC and slowly brought whoever they thought was worth a crap over the promotion, and I think I was supposed to be a guy that he was supposed to beat, and kind of they were going to build him up and stuff. And Brock was a freaking tough guy. I watched him fight in the WEC, but I kind of thought, knowing that I was going to fight him, what game plan would work to beat him, and I knew that I could take him down at will, and I did, and it wasn't the prettiest fight, but honestly, my thought was, hey, I'm brand new in the UFC. The most important thing to do is just to win. I don't care how I do it, but the most important thing is to win. And that was, it wasn't broke, and I didn't need to fix it, so I just kept taking him down and doing what damage I could at the time. But, on the ground, he had one submission that he favored more than everything, which was Kimura, which I love the Kimura, so I knew all the ins and outs on how to defend that, how to recognize it. And then on his feet, he was always looking for the big shot that I remember. He was always looking for a knockout punch, and a little wild, not super crisp, and I knew that if I had my head movement on point and my footwork, then I'd be able to at least get out of the way of it and get close the distance and then get in on him and take him down to the ground. And that was pretty much the whole story of the fight. I just ground out a victory, got my hand raised, and I was happy and set, and then my next fight, of course, was John Fish. So the UFC either really hated me or thought that I, could actually prove myself or something. I don't know what the thought process was there.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I was going to bring that up after you said you fought John Fish your second fight. I'm seeing this now. You were supposed to fight Josh Koscheck.
Yeah,
originally.
Right.
And I don't know what the case was. I don't know if you were told or whatever. Why was the sudden change in the card? What made it? What?
I'm trying to remember, and if I remember right, I think Josh ended up getting switched to a different opponent.
He did. Anthony Johnson.
Earlier fight, if I remember right.
Anthony Johnson.
So they're like, okay, well, here's his teammate John Fish. I'm like, oh great, the number one guy under GSP, great. So it's not like Koscheck was ranked far below John at the time either. So it was still, these are like top 10 minimum guys, in the UFC at the welterweight division at the time. So yeah, I was like, hey, this is an opportunity either way. I know it's my second fight in the UFC, but John's a wrestler, I'm a wrestler. I think I'll do pretty good. And he ended up beating me 29-28, but it's funny, man. I remember so vividly in that fight. I think it was like the second round. I'm standing in front of him with my hands up, and he just hit me. And it's like, I almost don't even remember the punch. I just remember getting hit and looking at him going, I was thinking, the internal dialogue, I was like, I'm in here with John Fitch, and I'm actually doing okay. Like, I think, this is great. This is good. It's like the thoughts going on in my head while I'm in there, trying to fight and, get beat up on at the same time. But, at the last 30 seconds. I just said to hell with it, and I was just going to let my hands fly. And I caught it, man. And I don't think I had the experience or the skill set enough to really recognize that he was hurt to kind of pull back and just let the hands continue to fly. My wrestler instincts took, the best of me, and I just went in for the takedown. And I think I even remember the commentator saying, "Oh, he's hurt." And I don't think Mike knows that he's hurt. But it was great. It was a great fight. And John complimented me afterwards. He said that I had a bright future in the UFC. Yeah, I'd be great. Yada yada yada. And it was a great night.
Now, what would you how would you think you would have fared against Josh Koscheck, his teammate? Because everybody hated Koscheck.
Well, I did fight Josh Koscheck.
Oh, you did?
Oh, I did, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Look a little farther down the record there.
Okay. So, I kind of missed that one. My bad. How'd it go, though?
Okay. No, we can talk about that one.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
I'm pretty passionate about that one. So, that camp was probably my most memorable camp. It was one that I really loved. I felt I was the most prepared for. I had the late Robert Follis helping coach me. I was working with a sports psychologist at the time. I'm forgetting his name offhand. He was fantastic, though. He'd worked with GSP as well. Sorry, I don't remember. I'll have to text you his name later for show notes or whatever. But anyway, Brian Kane. That was his name, Brian Kane.
Okay.
Excellent guy.
Yep.
So he had me listening to audio tracks, just to visualize things. We put up pictures of Josh Koscheck's ugly face all over the gym. So whether I was in front of a cardio machine or in front of a heavy bag, I was looking at his mug. So there were going to be no jitters once I met this guy. There was going to be, just no weird things. I was focused on this guy, right? And so it was just a great camp. And I remember I was like, I got to do something to punk this guy because I want to like wrestlers. I come from a wrestling background.
Right.
I actually kind of wanted him to do well on The Ultimate Fighter, but he was such an arrogant prick.
Yes, he was.
I can't like this guy.
Yes.
I want to like this guy, but I can't like him. So I was like, all right, whatever. I mean, he can do whatever he wants to do. So I was like, okay, what can I do to punk this guy? And it's he has awful hair. He has the worst hair
He
in
did.
MMA.
Yes, he did.
And so I was thinking, I'm going to buy a wig. So I went and we got this blonde, curly wig. And so I was up on the scale first. I was up on the scale first. So I weighed in, and he comes out weighing in. As he's getting up on a scale and weighing in, I'm putting this wig on. And then I turn around for the square off, and the ring girls, they're sitting, they're next to Dana. And the ring girl's like, Dana, look. And he looks over, and Dana's like, oh, shit. And he starts laughing. And everyone in the crowd, Josh is getting up on the scale, and everyone sees what I'm doing, and they're just going crazy. And of course, Josh thinks that they're like, oh, yay, they're cheering for me because I'm on the scale. I don't think that's what they were cheering for.
No.
And so Josh turns around and sees me, and his expression changes. And he gets very pissed off. And we get face to face, and it's a great square off, and it was hilarious. Probably the most memorable weigh-in I had, just because it was funny. To punk him like that, but the fight I thought went very well too. I mean, Josh is a tough guy, 2-time All-American. I think he was national champion too.
Yeah, he was.
So I kind of figured that our wrestling was going to kind of cancel each other out to a certain degree. I thought the game was going to be won on the stand-up more than anything, and just staying active. He's pretty quick, athletic, explosive guy, and so I knew that I had to keep moving. If I stayed stationary, he was going to take advantage of that. So I worked through the whole camp, staying very active on my feet, moving around, a lot of head movement, throwing my hands. And I beat him on every single CompuStat, the striking, the significant strikes landed, controlling the octagon. Every stat I beat him on, except for takedowns. He had 2 takedowns, I had 1 takedown. And somehow, I don't understand how, it was a split decision. 2 judges thought he won. 1 judge thought I won. And the funny thing is as soon as they, I thought I won. I knew for a fact, I beat this guy. This is great. And then as soon as they announced his name as the winner, he was like, oh yeah, I won. He was totally caught off guard because he knew he'd lost too. And, kind of as they're announcing his win, he's like, hey, dude, I'll give you a rematch. So he already knew that he lost. And so I thought that was pretty cool of him to at least admit, like, hey, I don't think I deserve that win. You know, he was pretty. I mean, that was the one time that I can say Josh Koscheck was a humble human being.
Wow!
Said the
That's
right
a
thing.
first.
I don't want to knock him too much.
That's a first. That's a first for
yeah,
him.
And you know, maybe to a certain degree, he's playing a character too, like some of the guys do. That's just not my thing, but I get it. But yeah, even Dana, because there were a lot of bad calls that night, which is another discussion entirely about how terrible some of these ringside judges are on calling fights. They have no freaking clue what they're watching.
They don't.
But I remember Ariel Helwani interviewing Dana afterwards and talking about what he thought about some of the fights, and specifically asking him about who he thought won the fight between me and Koscheck. And he's like, oh, I had Pierce winning that fight. So it's just kind of a bummer because you rely on these judges, which are supposed to be highly trained professionals, to make decisions literally on people's livelihoods. Had I won that fight, I think my career would have taken a different turn.
It would have, yeah, I think.
Would have did. And so those are kind of crucial moments where judges can't fail, you know? And I would like to see more things done to kind of minimize those errors.
Because after that fight, yeah, like you said, your career unfortunately didn't really go nowhere because you ended up fighting at UFC Live, Vera against Jones, and you were supposed to fight Kimmins, but he got injured and ended up fighting Paulino. What do you remember about that fight?
I remember he was a guy from Alaska. I don't really recall a lot of tough guys coming from Alaska. There's the rare exception here and there, but he did actually fight a teammate of mine before the UFC. Rick Story was a longtime teammate of mine, and they fought outside of the UFC. And Ricky handled him, and I kind of had the blueprint for Paulino. And the one funny thing about that fight that does stick out to me is that I remember one time I took him down, and some bizarre his foot got caught between the actual fence and the canvas, and so I couldn't take him all the way down because he was in such a precarious position. I couldn't get his foot out; it was wedged in there. But I just remember dominating him, and he didn't really have much of a chance to win that fight.
And then you fought again against another newcomer, Macular Alves, in August of that year at UFC 118.
Yeah, I actually enjoyed that one because he was talking a bunch of shit about how I was just a wrestler, he was going to submit me, yada, he's a black belt, blah, blah, blah. And I ended up submitting him with a crossbody armbar. Yeah, that one actually brings back bad memories. That guy, I had so much top pressure on that guy. He was a hairy guy. Let me just say. So here's some nitty gritty that some of you don't know, but it was just. I end up walking back after I think it was the second round to my corner, and I sit down and I look at myself, and I've just got like all this hair on me, and my corner's like wiping it off. It's like, where's that coming from? It was all his freaking. He was just a hairy dude, and I from all the top pressure apparently worn off his body hair, and it attached to me between rounds. It was disgusting. But no, I was happy. I ended up submitting the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. It made me feel good, like poetic justice.
And what about what can you tell me about Johnny Hendricks? How tough was he as a fighter? Because I know he's still fighting to this day.
Yeah, Johnny was a tough guy. He, again, another. It always seemed like the wrestlers were the tough guys, right? At least the welterweight division at the time. Johnny was a tough guy. He was national champ too, Oklahoma kid. I knew he was going to be tough, and the guy hit hard. But I thought the same thing about him. Like, I thought our wrestling was going to cancel each other out, and it was going to be a battle of who had the better stand-up. And he hit me, and I hit him, and we kind of went back and forth. And I knew it was close, but right at the end, I took him down, and I was really surprised. Like, number one, how easy it was to take him down, but even more, how easy it was to hold him down. So I kind of feel like I had almost the wrong game plan coming into it. I feel like if I would have tried to take him down more, I and stay on top, I might have won that fight. But that was another close one too, split decision. And he later, like shortly thereafter, became the champ. So I mean, I knew where I was at in the lineup of the welterweights at the time. I mean, I was right there, with the top guys. But I do remember a few details of that fight that kind of put my head in the wrong spot. But it was so bizarre. Like, I'm sitting there fighting this guy, Johnny, in the octagon, and I'm hearing, just oddly enough, because when I'm in there, I'm usually not hearing a bunch. Like, if things kind of come and go, you hear the roar of the crowd. You try to key in on what your coach is saying and stuff, but I was hearing crap that his coach was saying, and his coach was calling out weird things. He was saying cheeseburger, and I later realized that was a particular combination that they code worded to throw on me. I don't know why it was cheeseburger, but I just kept hearing that. Like, what is this guy saying? I don't understand. Why is he calling out cheeseburger? It was the most bizarre thing. I had to ask him about that later. But ironically, oddly enough, we ended up, just by chance, running into each other at the beer garden afterwards. And he came to me, he's like, "Oh my God, dude, great fight. That was insane." And he's like, "I knew after I hit you the first time, I hit you with everything I had, I wasn't knocking you out." It's like, you got a chin on you, man. I was like, "Well, thank you." Then we talked about bow fishing for a while. I kind of kicked it a little bit and drank a beer, but yeah, it was a good night despite the loss. I do think Johnny won that fight. It was a close call, though.
It was. I actually kind of remember that fight. It was a close call, and it could have gone either way. Next one, you won unanimous on UFC on Fox in 2012 against Carlos Eduarda.
Yeah.
What do you remember about that fight?
That was another. I kind of liked picking on the Brazilians at the time. I guess I had.
Yeah, you did. It looked like, yeah.
Yeah, I had Uncle Chael to look up to for that, I guess. It was always fun rivalry, the jiu-jitsu guys versus the wrestlers, and it was just fun to play that role, I guess. But with him, he did pretty good in the UFC for the time that he was in. He gave some guys some trouble, and I thought it was going to be a pretty tough fight, but. I mean, it really kind of seemed like, in studying his film, like there were two versions of him. There was the super prepared, explosive, ready to go guy, and then there was the guy that it almost looked like he had half of a camp and gassed really early. And I think I caught him on one of those times. That's what it felt like looking back on it. I don't remember a bunch of fine details about what I landed on him or the particular positions that we ended up in. I do know that I took him down and kind of ground out a victory on him. But yeah, he wasn't the fighter that I always prepare for worst case scenario, and he just wasn't that guy that night.
What about your quickest fight that you ever had?
My quickest fight, so this will come back before the UFC. This was when I was still fighting locally in Portland, Oregon. That was at Sport Fight, which was Matt Lindland's promotion, largely a Team Quest promotion, really. And it was against Mike Dolce. Mike Dolce was on The Ultimate Fighter. He does the Dolce diet. We genuinely hated each other at this point. We talked a mess of crap on this, local fight forum at the time. And there was a lot of back and forth. And I basically said at the end, and I remember the last thing I said to him, I said, I'm not going to try and submit you. I'm not going to try and knock you out. I'm going to beat the living piss out of you for 15 minutes. So there's no question that I'm the better fighter. And oddly enough, of course, this Sport Fight was a boxing ring. It wasn't a cage. So the rules were a little different. And, before the fight, the referee comes up to you in the locker room and kind of tells you what they expect to see, goes over the rules, tells us, if there are any questions, ask us now, blah, blah, blah. And I remember one of the rules with the ring, or with the ring as opposed to the cage, is he said that any part of the body that's outside the ropes is off limits. Anything that's inside the ropes is fair game to strike. Okay, fair enough. So we get out there, they call me out first, Mike comes in second. They do the announcements, and I put my hand out to see if he wants to touch gloves in the center, and he's got this death look on his face and shaking his head no. I'm like, all right, dude, I guess it's not going to be a sporting thing. So, we get out there, and I trained. First of all, I always watch film on my fighters, the guys that I'm going to fight, and I usually watch the last 4 fights because generally they don't make a huge evolution in their fight game based on the last 4 fights. And so you try and key in on, it really lets you develop a game plan. And so he had a really bad habit. He's southpaw, so he leads with his right leg forward. And he had this bad habit of throwing out a jab at distance that had no intention of hitting anybody. There was nothing on it. He didn't even really step forward with it. It was just a bad habit of throwing out a jab. And so we knew that his only chance of winning that fight was to get a lucky haymaker, because he was kind of known for throwing heavy shots and knocking guys out. It's kind of what his reputation was. And so I thought if I took away his only weapon, then he was mine, because I'd seen him on the ground and it was a pitiful thing. And so I was like, okay, so my game plan is as soon as I see him with that jab, I'm going to key on that. And as soon as I see that jab come out, I'm coming with an overhand right to a takedown. And since he didn't want to, touch gloves in the center, we came, ring. He came right out at me, did that jab, overhand right to a takedown. And it's funny, your internal dialogue, again, in just that fraction of a second. Like, I've done hundreds, probably thousands of takedowns over my lifetime. And I remember in that moment thinking, there's something different about this takedown. And I ended up taking him down. He landed, mostly inside the ring. His, upper half, about the chest up, was outside of the ring. And I postured up, drew up to start throwing strikes down. And I saw that he was basically cold. His eyes were rolled in the back of his head. And I thought in that instant, I was like, I've already won the fight. Started hitting his face as it was outside the ropes. And I got 2, maybe 3 shots stopped before the ref pulled me off. And that was my first knockout too. It was just such poetic justice, because here he was, this knockout guy. We talked a bunch of crap leading up to the fight, and I broke every knockout record that he had. And it was literally, you can find it on YouTube, actually, if you type in Mike Pierce and or versus Mike Dolce, you'll pull it up, and it's literally 5 seconds long. That's how long the knockout is. 5 seconds. That's one of the quickest knockouts in MMA history. 5 seconds is quick.
Now, in the UFC, did you, besides the Koscheck fight, did you have a rivalry with a fighter in your time in the UFC that you had a grudge with, but then after you respected them after you fought them?
I say Koscheck was probably the only one that I genuinely didn't like. There were other guys that I respected, that were super tough, that I even fought more than once. And I'm not friends with a ton of the opponents. I can kind of speak to like the tougher guys. Like here's one guy, for example, Aaron Simpson. Aaron Simpson was a 185-pound guy. Done well in the division, knocked out a lot of guys. His name was A-Train, right? A guy freaking had hands. Hit you and put you cold. Also, a 2-time All-American wrestler from Arizona. I knew it was going to be a tough fight. And I ended up knocking him out, but he was kicking my butt in the first round. He kind of clipped me with one of those overhand rights, and it wasn't as sloppy as it used to be. He used to have this really sloppy overhand right, and he tightened up his boxing, to his credit, and I just didn't slip, fast enough or far enough, and he kind of caught me on the side of the head right here, which at that point I was in survival mode, and I ended up barely surviving the round. And I was trying to, gather myself in the corner for the 60 seconds that you have, right? And I was sitting there composing myself, and I was like, okay, he's going to come back with that right hand. That's exactly what I would do if I was him. And so I just thought, okay, as soon as you see him move, I don't care what it is, throw a right hand, just a counter right hand. And I just, I slipped and threw this counter right hand, and it just landed picture perfect on his chin. And he was out standing up, and I threw that right, and I came around with a hook, and I saw that he was falling, so the hook actually kind of turned into a little bit of a grab on his head, and I just put a couple more into him as he fell to the ground, and it was over. But I'm still friends with that guy. He's a really good guy. we still have to get a beer somewhere. He's like, we got to get a beer sometime.
And
like,
what's funny? You know what's funny? I ended up finding him on Twitter just like I found you. And now he follows me. I got his number, so now I got to bring that up. So
yeah, and you got to tell him that a carnivore beat the vegan. So you got to bring that up too.
I will see what he'll say about that.
And that's the other thing. I told myself, like, I can't lose to a vegan. I would never hear the end of it for the end of time. So there's that guy, and the other one that comes to mind is a guy named Paul Bradley. He was actually the guy that got me discovered by the UFC. I fought him in Philadelphia. I think it was 2008-ish, maybe early 2009. I can't remember. But God, he was a tough guy, hot prospect. He was actually on the Ultimate Fighter show for a brief amount of time. Made it into the house, but he ended up having some sort of a skin funk where they basically said, okay, look, this is a contagious thing. We can't let you continue. And so, by no fault of his, he was kind of removed from the show and the competition. But at the time, he was 10-0. He's a two-time All-American from Iowa. He's not a wimp. He's a tough dude. But a real nice guy. His nickname is the Gentleman.
Of course.
So, I was looking at that as a really good opportunity, right? And I think the promoter, because this is back on the East Coast, right? And I think they just thought, okay, this is somebody who's decent, but I think we're gonna, springboard Paul into the UFC with this fight. And I got out there and I performed. It was a great fight, but I knew. Hold on, my son. Hey, no, guys, you gotta go. Daddy's doing an interview. This is live. Go on.
Hey, like I said, I've got two of my own, so it's understandable.
I know. He's 3 and I got a 9-year-old here. That's when you take him over their place. Thank you. Anyway, I kind of had a sneaking suspicion that the promoter was bringing me out there as a stepping stone for Paul. So it was a great fight. I ended up getting my hand raised at the end of the fight, and to his credit, he actually talked to me at the after party, and he's like, you have to know that I brought you in here to get beat. So I appreciated the honesty, and so that was great. It's like, I kind of thought so, but I wasn't going to let that deter me because I have goals and, I have ambitions to make it to the UFC. And, it was funny. There were actually 3 guys that I know that made it to the UFC. It was me, Paul Bradley, and Tyrone Woodley actually fought on that card too. So it was a good night of fights. But I ended up fighting him later in the UFC. Once he made it in the UFC, he was a 185. And he had some success there, but I think he realized that he was a little too small for that division, and so he ended up dropping down to 170. And I don't know what led to that fight, because there was no animosity between us. We were friends, actually. And then we ended up getting the call that we were, matched together to fight again. And it's like, okay, well, I know the game plan for Paul, and we ended up fighting again, and I beat him with a split decision, I think it was. I can't remember. I think it was a split decision. But he was bummed, because I think that's the fight that was the last one for him in the UFC. I think they released him after that, and it was just a bummer, because both of us were top competitors, and neither one of us deserved to get cut from the UFC, but man, they're a cutthroat group, so
that's true. They are, yeah. Besides the obvious fight, which I know you wanted to have, GSP, which was on top of the welterweight division, and I know you had Fitch, which also became your friend. He was number 2 ranked,
right.
And Koscheck. Is there a fighter in your division that you really would have wanted to fight? And if there was any other fight in any of the other divisions that you would have wanted to make weight for?
I always kind of wondered what it would be like to be at 155, but I had to really just change my body composition to some degree to make 55. I think I would have done good there at 55. I would have had guys that were like 6 foot, like the tallest guy I fought, Seth Brzezinski, 6'3". And I beat him too, but I mean, when you're a welterweight, 170 pounds, that comes in all sorts of different forms. You get short little balls of muscle and guys that are 6'3" and taller with crazy amount of reach. So there's a little less of that at 155. So I think I probably would have fared a little better, but I was happy at 170. And as far as guys go that I would have wanted to fight, I'm not sure that there's anyone in particular else that I would have wanted to fight. I probably would have wanted to fight John Fitch again when I had a little more experience under my belt and kind of test the skills again. But I think that's probably the one that I wish I would have.
What about a Carlos Condit?
He would have been fun too. I mean, he's a cardio guy and good on the ground, good on his feet. But with me, my losses always stick with me. Those are the ones I remember the most. So I wish that I would have had a different camp, different experience, or just more knowledge under my belt at that point, because I still was pretty green.
Fair enough. So, let's get into your final fight. What do you remember about your final fight? I think it was was it WEC?
No, my final fight was in the UFC.
It was in the UFC, okay. I saw on Wikipedia it said something. I don't remember what it said. It said something, I think it was, I don't remember. But did you know that was probably going to be the end of your fighting career? Was that fight?
I had a good sneaking suspicion that had I lost, that could have been the last fight in the UFC, because, now keep in mind, that was the only time in my entire MMA career, amateur, pro, that I'd ever lost 2 in a row.
Mm-hmm.
And again, like I said, that was the magic number that the UFC has always used, especially with domestic guys. You lose 2 in a row, they kick you out, and then they'll tell you, "Oh, go get a few more wins somewhere else, and then we might have you come back."
Bring you back.
Yeah, and of course, there's no guarantee with that. I mean, they just say that, and like they do everything else, they say one thing and do another. But yeah, I had a sneaking suspicion, and I was already working at a handicap at that point. I had a slightly damaged knee from the Paul Harris fight. I had a torn meniscus and probably a little bit to the ACL, but not enough to warrant any surgery, because I had it looked at afterwards and had it imaged. And I was told that if I just take it easy on it, that it would be fine. And I did what the doctor said, and it seemed fine afterwards. Everything was great. And then 30 days before my fight, I had a coach who was a little overzealous, and we were grappling, and it was a tough go. But like, with short time left on the round, the guy jumps for a heel hook. And with heel hooks, they're extremely dangerous. It's not like an arm bar or any other slow-going choke where, there's some time to react and you can kind of feel things happen before it becomes dangerous, right? With heel hooks, it's kind of like they go, and then they're just broke.
Mm-hmm.
You start tearing ligaments and things. And he jumped to the heel hook and just turned it really quick, which, again, if you're a trained person that's in the right mind, these are what we call catch and release submissions. You catch it and then you let it go. You don't reef on these things because it can hurt somebody, or whoever you're training with can move the wrong way, and it can hurt themselves as well. And so they're particularly a pretty dangerous submission. Well, he ended up reefing on this, and I heard my knee pop 2 more times. And I was like, okay, that's not good, considering it was already previously injured a little bit. And I got up, started walking around. I knew something wasn't right. So that whole camp, from that 30-day point leading on, I had a torn ACL and a torn meniscus.
Mm.
And so I remember, and you got to think, I hadn't made a lot of money up until this point because I was already coming off of another long injury with a broken hand. So long story short, I was put in a position where I had to fight to make money.
Mm.
And so I took the fight, and I remember the first time I tried winging a kick at him, it felt like somebody, I landed the kick, so he didn't check all of it, and I remember it felt like somebody had taken a baseball bat to my knee. And in that moment, as I was bringing my leg back to the canvas, I was thinking, God, please just stay up on your feet, because I was thinking I was going to fall to the ground. I was thinking I'm bringing my leg back and it's not going to be able to hold me up and I'm going to the ground. This is going to be a short night. But I brought my leg back and I was still on my feet, very pleasantly surprised about that. And I was like, okay, I got to pretend like I'm not hurt now. And so I started throwing some strikes to kind of, get him off of me. But I just wasn't connecting with one and like a half good leg. And beating decision, and that was kind of the end of my career. And they were like I think it was, yeah.
And well, at least you had. I mean, I saw your total. I mean, out of 24 fights. I mean, at least you did what you wanted in your career. I mean, I know it's not as what you wanted, but hey, you can at least you one of few that can actually say they were in the UFC.
That's I got to live quite a while. Like I said before, there's only a short window of opportunity where you can do.
Yeah, so you're one in a million that there is. So I mean I can concur with that.
Things like so.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're good. Okay. Good. Yeah. Connection was getting a little bit bad there.
Yeah, my internet, the Wi-Fi keeps coming in and out. But yeah, I mean, over the years, I got to meet a lot of good people and travel to a lot of cool places and world and get some perspective and grow up a little bit. So it's a good experience. Man.
So I got couple more questions before we cut off here. Do you see, with the addition of a couple promotions now of one, I think it is, and PFL, Pro Fighting League, I think on ESPN, do you see them competing ultimately with UFC if they actually pay these fighters, unlike what the UFC does? Because I know it's totally different.
I think there's incentive to fight for those other promoters, but the UFC market share is like I think in the 90 percentile, so they don't really have competition. There might be other promotions that throw shows and pay fighters, but the UFC market share of MMA is dominant. It's not even debatable. I think the last figure I saw was in the 90 percentile. So, I mean, essentially they have no competition. I think it's good for the UFC to have competition. I think it does nothing but good things for the sport. But realistically, these people or these other promotions, they're not going to... I don't see them getting as big as the UFC unless some groundwork is done to kind of change the fundamentals of how the structure of the sport works.
Right, and like you said, it'll all come down to that lawsuit, so we'll see.
Well, it comes down to the lawsuit and the Ali Act. If the Ali Act passes, then the UFC the market share, that'll kind of go away. They've already done so much work to be the top promotion. I would like to see them remain the top promotion. But I think it would be great to have other promotions competing on a more even playing field. And
right.
I mean, maybe the UFC holds 80% there or 70% or whatever it is, but it would be nice to see other promotions competing for fighters and throwing shows and, giving fighters more opportunities than what they have. And right now, it's like a take it or leave it scenario.
Right. And the next question is, we got into it with Reebok, like you were trying to say. Take us through that. Right. What's the whole point? Because I know before UFC signed the deal with Reebok, it was who was it? That main company that did the shirts. I can't think right now.
There was
I can't think.
Affliction. That's what Dan always.
Yes. Affliction, and I think that was it.
Right. Well, there was also Tap Out too. They did a lot of
Yes.
apparel as well.
So
in the early days.
Is this like another like we talked about earlier, a money grab deal? Like, because I kind of miss those shirts, like the Tap Out, the Affliction. It seems
Well, that's
like
because there weren't. Yeah, I mean, because that was an organic thing. I mean, those guys that launched Tap Out, they were at local shows, at, UFC events, building their brand. You know. They did the organic thing. It was a big company on when Reebok did what Venom is doing. And so yeah, it was really kind of cool to see these companies come and go into their own. But yeah, I mean, the UFC wanted a more uniform look like the NFL has or the NBA. They want the appearance of a legitimate sport without legitimately paying professional athlete salaries,
Right.
or persons. So I don't think do anything without the intention of making money and profits for themselves. Everything comes down to their dollar.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, and I get that as a business, but it would be nice to say that for taking years off of our life for people entertainment and for our enjoyment too. Not that there's part of that too, but getting a more fair share of the pie is what we're after.
And my last question to you is, with the pay-per-view coming up, I know you still watched a fight game. What fight are you looking forward to this coming pay-per-view? I think is tomorrow night, I believe.
Yeah, it's Chandler's fighting. I'm looking forward to that fight. I have a teammate, Brent Primus from Bellator, who actually beat him with that low kick. I don't know if you watched that one in Bellator, but he was one-time champ at 155. Brent came in. Brent's a step too. His leg, and Brent was the 155-pound champ for Bellator for a while, and now Michael Chandler's kind of gotten his shot in the UFC, and now this will be his second fight in, and he's already fighting for the title. Mm-hmm. So I'm interested to see how Chandler does, if it's only just because it kind of gauges where Brent's at too. I like seeing our local guys do well in the sport. With the others.
Yeah, you'll have to actually show me that fight that you were talking about, because I know of Bellator, but I haven't really seen much of Bellator. So you'll have to text me that. Is it Is there any other fight that intrigues you on the card besides that one? Is there a wild card that would steal the show, you would think?
No, I mean, I want to see that main event more than anything, I think. Just because, Michael Chandler, he's coming from Bellator, which is a competitor of the UFC, and the UFC always likes to tout that they have the best talent. So, in another respect, it's good to see that talent outside of the UFC not only the talent the UFC already has. So I'm excited for it for a couple of those reasons, and also to see, if Michael Chandler does well, then that's hopefully good news for Brent too, because he's still in Bellator and he's a top contender for the title there as well. And maybe at some point he'll migrate over to the UFC. Who knows? But he's definitely got the skill set to make it to the UFC.
Definitely, I hope so too. I want to always see more fighters come out of different leagues. That's what the UFC is based on, getting these different fighters. So I would love to see that. But I definitely thank you for your time. It was fun. I had a blast. I hope you did as well.
Yeah, I did. Thank you.
I'd love for you to come on again. You got my number. I got your number. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll have to put you in touch with Aaron Simpson. Well, I guess you already have his number, but it'll be a good one to interview too.
Yeah, I can't wait to interview that one and hear about your fight. I know he's going to enjoy that one.
He won't remember it. He won't remember it, so it'll be real short.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's true. I was reading it was 29 seconds, so.
In the second round, he might remember the first round.
But yeah, it was awesome. I'll be texting you. I'll send you a copy of the episode so you can share it.
Great.
But yeah, and also I'll also be texting you because I think you could be very knowledgeable. There's something I want to talk to you about as well, and I'll also be texting you that as well. So we'll definitely be in touch. I thank you again. You stay safe out there. You and your family.
All right, I will, man. It was a pleasure.
Definitely. You have a good night.
All right, too.